you look at the word kingdom, it's the king's domain. And that's the jurisdiction of the king in the areas where the king has exerted influence, okay, to put it in kind of dictionary terms. And what that means is the king's domain starts as you're the high priest of your own home, first of all. So you have one father of a family, and he's governing his own home. A common at many conferences where they'll say, please govern your own children. The idea is that you govern your own home. You get 50 fathers together and you've built a township. And you get 250 of these townships together, maybe you have a county. And it used to work that way. As a matter of fact, elections at the top level were somewhat unimportant because they had so little jurisdiction over areas of life as compared to the local level. And yet at the local level, look what's happening. We're electing school boards. School boards pick curriculum. School boards decide the theory of education our children are going to get. And yet how closely scrutinized are those really? Townships are often, and town boards are often making determinations or voting on determinations to land use and planning. I mean, we deal with some of our businesses, as you know, John, where we're dealing with planners who arbitrarily step in and make planning decisions, not based on fact, but on an opinion that affect every business in the community. And yet, who's really paying close attention to those elections? In fact, if we were to pay close attention to the local level and really take authority at the local level, you could begin to turn down the enticements at the upper levels, let's say the federal government, saying, we don't want your road grants. We don't want your education grants. We don't need that funding. We as a state of Wisconsin, as an example, we're going to govern our own state. And you, federal government, you just be responsible for those things that are carefully delineated in the Constitution, the limited powers that you're supposed to have. You let us take care of education. You let us take care of the widows and the orphans. You let us take care of building roads. And you keep moving that jurisdiction on down until finally you're down to a small community that's saying, well, here's our key needs. We got to keep our roads up. We have our educational system. I'm a homeschooler, so I obviously have some interesting opinions about that. Our food supply, and you've got these basic systems you need to run every day. And frankly, you can take this whole country back very quickly if people begin to once again bring that jurisdiction locally and be accountable. Now what happens is we lean to the government, and frankly, we can blame the government on everything, when in fact we have elected them and then placed ourselves into that slavery. And I think that's why some call this, this is the plantation America. We're almost becoming part of a giant plantation. And we need to reject that notion and once again kind of assume or take hold of that idea of that individual, entrepreneurial, libertarian almost mindset, not French libertarian, but the sense that, liberty in the sense that we're protecting each other's rights. We care what our neighbors' rights are, not just what my own are. And I think we'll begin to take on those principles. We can once again remove all these bigger government entanglements that are really strangling our country to this day.
That's right, and the way to do that is not going to be to step in and overnight change the system through some kind of violent revolution. That never works. What is necessary, and the beauty of America, and this is why I'm so hopeful about America, is because we already have a biblically based governmental structure called the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. All we have to do is to peel off the wallpaper of a false system that has been painted on the facade by a group of elites who took over educational training in about 70 or 80 years ago. Slowly but surely, they have trained our young people in Keynesian economics or socialism, as opposed to Christian economic theory, which was the Christian work ethic. And the result is that young people simply don't know what is their own system. They don't know that we have a biblically based free enterprise system, which is the most successful the world has ever known, and we don't want to destroy it. They don't know that the Constitution is the foundation, and we can't have a president or a Congress who breaks the Constitution without the penalties that go with that. We can't just let them do it. Well, our young people don't know it, and so what we need to do is to see, number one, we have to learn what it is that is truthful and that has worked through the ages and really is based upon biblical principle, because the only way to really know something is truly true is to know that it's absolutely true, and the only thing that's absolutely true in this world is the Bible, because it comes directly from God. So he tells us what really works. And the second thing we need to do once we learn the truth is that we need to permeate and simply displace the false system that is laying on the surface. We don't need a revolution. We just need to begin to live it just like you were saying, Dan. We begin to live this out in our own lives. Sovereignty is not just a theological doctrine. Sovereignty is a very specific thing that you do in your life that tells everybody around you that you believe that God is the person who's going to meet your needs, not the government. And so what do we need to do? We just need to, tens of millions of believers need to be living out the winning principles of America's form of government and biblical economics and become like little republics in their own homes. We need to displace the state welfare system and the largesse with true prosperity that comes from our own families and from our own discipline and entrepreneurship. We need to feed and care for the truly needy and the elderly and our grandparents, not depend upon the state, quote, safety net, which is collapsing. We need to educate our own children, not have the state dictate what they will learn and what kind of sex education is going to be crammed down their throats. All of these things. And then, of course, in the economy, we can produce our way out of this if we will begin to voluntarily work together and produce and work and discipline ourselves 6 days a week. We can recreate the greatest economic engine the world has ever known in America if we will do it God's way. So how exciting is this? We have the system. It's this external facade that simply can be taken off like wallpaper. There's great hope.
Yeah, that's the hard truth, Marshall. And, in talking about local government, if people that agree with appropriations, for example, and, if you do that, you end up part of the corrupt system in a way that stretches all the way to Washington. Because how could you really talk about liberty and freedom and fiscal responsibility, right? If your local government is making multi-million-dollar exceptions for whatever, for business, for themselves, or a particular industry, maybe a union, or even like you said, Dan, a local school. See, so I think to address the problem, I don't think we have any moral authority to make this argument unless we're really willing to make a stand. Now, it's been said that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Now, I agree with that 100%. Although, I think I would add to that, anybody who sits around and doesn't do anything, I don't know how you consider that person good to begin with. You know what I'm saying? If that person doesn't do anything. So what I'm saying is, and both of you guys have addressed this very, very well, that we need to confront corruption at the local level too, and don't be complacent about it. And wake up and take responsibility. Take action. That's what we have to do. So as you said, Marshall, knowing that the problem really begins at the individual heart, but it stretches all the way to Washington, we need to confront all levels of government and but concentrate our energy and our focus on the areas that I think will have the greatest effect. And that begins with ourselves and our local governments, because that's where we live. I know, Dan, you've been saying this for 20 years. I wonder if anybody's listening.
Well, there's those that are going to listen and going to do something about it. And there are those that hear it and say, gee, it's nice, but they won't. There's those that reject it. So what you do is you try to work with those people in your local community that want to make changes. I know we have begun meetings with local people in our area as to how would we begin our own localized, literally, mini country within a country, running everything from our industries of production of food and roads and everything else. So the dialogue has begun. But it's kind of exciting to see the example actually starting to play out. We've begun the harvest season, right, in real earnest here. And it's kind of fun because you first have the harvest you take in that you need and that you need to sell for your business purposes on our organic farm. But now the surplus starts. So the surplus comes in these big baskets, and we simply call friends and neighbors and say, look, we have surplus harvest. Come get it, and basically free will offering. Take whatever you want, put whatever you want in the basket. And then eventually we get to the point where it's go out in the field and glean what's left. In other words, take whatever's left out there. You can just take it. That's a biblical principle with respect to harvesting and letting people that maybe are struggling a little bit go out there. They do the work. It's not free. They glean what's left in the field, and they take it home, and they can can it, freeze it, whatever. Well, that mindset's got to kind of incubate in every area of life. Educating your children. You can do that in your own home. You can network with groups of people around you. Much of this we already do in our area. And our little township of Martell used to have its own government that built its roads, ran its schools, maintained its weights and measures for years. It was literally independent of the state of Wisconsin in terms of needing anybody else. But at the same time, of course, there's connecting roads between Martell and Spring Valley and Milwaukee, and then more communities gather together and they build that infrastructure, or they coordinate from the state to state to build a freeway like 35W from Minnesota all the way down to Texas. There's a way to do this from the bottom up, but it really has to start with individual families committed to this type of mindset. And that means dads that are out there, you got to lead your home, and you've got your helpmeet with you, that's your wife, and she is the number one person you have to come together and have a vision for taking the gifts that have been given to you, the things that you can do, and put them in action. Obviously, everybody can't do everything. What you do is you pick the thing you can be accomplished at, and you start working on that. And Marshall, you're right. We're commanded to work 6, rest 1. And the only reason we're commanded to rest 1 is because we should love the work we're doing so much that God has to tell us to stop one day and rest. It should be like we're compelled to do that because our work is, in fact, our ministry.
Right.
It's one of our ministries.
Well, that's it.
And that's why we're told to rest 1.
And we're winding up here in a second. And by the way, if you'd like to contact us, you could reach us at thestoryofliberty.net.
The Story of Liberty is on Roku. Add the channel and be amazed. The Story of Liberty's goal is to restore our liberties by educating in the truth. These stories are amazing and entertaining. Add our Roku channel today at thestoryofliberty.net or in the Roku channel store. In the story of liberty, even though the evil plans of kings and rulers advancing their own agendas seem to be winning, the divine hand of God works a counterplan. a plan of liberty for the people. Add us today at thestoryofliberty.net.
This point of local government to have a clear and open public record of events and to get the word out to as many people as possible and about government and make it accessible and understandable to as many people as possible that live in the area. I mean, eventually that information will lead to the election of board members and judges and sheriffs and assessors, even collectors, who better represent a greater percentage of the population, if the information's out there, and better represent the local values, like you said, Dan. It'll increase accountability. It'll help end corruption, self-serving corruption and waste. We should know, too, that these ideas that we're talking about are being implemented. And you guys probably know some counties, they're beginning to assert local control against state and federal encroachments. It happened in Sedgwick, Maine, not long ago. They basically declared what I would, call sovereignty in that sense for their township over its own local food supply. They were just tired of the state and federal regulations over their local meat and raw milk, etc. So they declared the right, and they determined to be free of that tyranny. And they basically said that they recognized their authority to protect that right, and in their town of Sedgwick, and they considered the state and the federal regulations as a usurpation of the citizens' right. And they went on to declare further that, here's what they said. I'll read it right out of there, what they adopted in their minutes. They said, it shall be unlawful for any law or regulation adopted by the state or federal government to interfere with the rights recognized by this ordinance. And this was applied to any corporation, too. So, Sedgwick, Maine had the guts. And I'll tell you, this model to resist federal regulation is happening in many municipalities today. It's going to lead to a lot of court battles, for sure. And I'll tell you, this is true in other areas as well. Some local counties, and even states now, I'm not sure about Florida or Wisconsin or where you are, Marshall, in California, but they've declared that they will not honor Obama's health care. They've declared it null in their jurisdictions. And
that brings up, I think, a very important point, because we're getting to the point of almost civil war in our country in many ways, where we have a top-down government saying, you're going to take it our way, and you've got local people saying, no, we're going to do it our way. And what is going to be the salve, the love, the relations that are going to avoid any kind of a major external conflict? And I think this comes down to our own lives, and that's why I challenge our audience as I challenge myself, that when I'm sitting in a board meeting, what most people do when they go to a city council meeting or a school board meeting is that they're always thinking about their own interests. So you'll have unions coming in saying, I want mine. You'll have some business coming in saying, I want to be able to do what I want to do. And so you got people arguing different views rather than going back to the fundamental principles of what is right for everybody. And that takes bowing before the King of Kings, because only He can give us the strength to do that, because human nature wants to have our own way. And so everybody wants to fight. And the only way to get around that is for each of us to bow the knee to an accepted standard. That's what's called the eternal rules of right by George Washington. They were the early Hebrew principles, according to Thomas Jefferson. They're basically what the Bible says. But it's the Christian work ethic. Let me just think of this. If I was sitting in the audience. I was sitting in the audience of the board meeting. Am I living these principles out myself? Am I saving in my own life? Do I understand stewardship and private ownership and control of property and how that was given by God? But we're stewards. All of us are stewards. We have to take good care of it, environmentally and every other way. Do I have loyalty in my relationship with my family, with my business associates? Do I have honesty in the way I treat every dollar and every penny that comes to me? Do I tithe? Am I giving unto the Lord so that these social needs can be met? Most people don't know that the tithe was instituted not just so that there be a big church on the corner, but that the needs of the poor and the needy and the educational services could be met. In ancient Israel and even today, throughout the history of America, it was the tithing associations or the nonprofit charities that have fed the poor, met the needs, took care of the immigrants, and all of those that were in need. It took because the Christians were tithing. They no longer do that. The average giver gives about less than 1% of his income. So if we're not tithing, if we're not involved in personal charity, if we're not optimistic based upon God meeting our own needs, if we don't have this sense of sacrificial generational inheritance where we are sacrificing our personal pleasures so that our children will have more, if we don't have those principles living out in our own lives, then whenever we go into a governmental problem or an economic problem, we're going to be too self-centered and we're going to end up with two big egos fighting it out. If we're living it out, it's going to come right out of us. And it's like my friend Kirk Cameron, who is doing this film with us. People ask him about the concept of race, or do you care for people? You're so free enterprising. And then he walks in with his 6 children, 4 of them adopted and 3 of them with an African American heritage. Is the argument over? The argument's over. I'm loving people. I'm caring for the people. I pick up the orphan. How about you? See, I mean, you don't have to say it. You just live it. And so let's stop spending the money that we don't have in Washington. We're broke. We know we're broke. But let's come back down to the local level. There are tens of millions of Americans who feel the way we feel. We just simply need to be able to go before God and say, Lord, what can I do to bring the salve of the Spirit to heal our land? And it's going to start in our own hearts, I think, with repentance to what we're not doing, not just what the government is doing.
And John, you asked the question, well, how much more attentive would we be at the local level if, in fact, a lot of these different operations were moved to the local level? Well, let's put this in real terms. If someone's showing up to your door from the local township board and says, okay, I've got to collect that $600 today that we're using to fix the road and take care of the little one-room schoolhouse we're running here, and we've got a little bit we put in the box to help we've got some people in town that are suffering. Can you imagine how attentive you'd be if someone came to your door saying, I need that check for $600 today? You would be very attentive. Oh, really? We voted on $600? Well, when was that? Putting it in real terms, you would see, in fact, something is happening because you'd have to write the check for the $600. What happens today is the money just kind of disappears out of your paychecks, goes off to some big, whatever it is, government account, and then just pours back out in numbers that we can't even begin to put our hands on. I mean, what does $1 trillion really look like? And it just disappears. Well, I got news. When suddenly it's your checkbook and it's your $600 you're writing the check for, you're going to really want to know what's happening with that check. And I think you have a better chance of getting people at a local level to sit in a room and go, there's really a need there. That's a real need. We all agree there's a real need, and this is the amount we're going to be able to put toward it. And that's what you're hitting at, Marshall. There has to be that moral integrity to be able to see things beyond just your own self-greed. That you have to be able to see beyond that and see, no, this is a real need, and this is the right level of jurisdiction for that need to be met. Or no, we need to give our local churches a call and say, look, we have this need. Please come engage in this need with the local family, keeping the jurisdictions in the right areas so that you don't take those resources from the wrong area and then there's problems. Right now, the money all just goes out from us. We really don't understand what that looks like because it's billions and trillions, and then somehow all comes back after it's sifted its way through all these government agencies And frankly, I think what they say is what 1/10 of the money actually gets back to the need at hand. Well, that's, no business could operate that way, let alone could a charity. Charities are the reverse of that. 99% of the money that's put in goes back to the actual need. And so if you could bring it to the local level, people would really see what that money is doing.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things I encourage people to do is pay attention to your local level, what they're spending your money on. Go to a school board meeting. Go through that bookkeeping transaction they give you at the meeting and see how did they actually spend their money. Then ask yourself what's important on that list and what is not important.
You're right, Dan. They've proven that in America's 3,000 plus or minus counties in America, that when people get involved in local government and really watch where the buck is going, taxes are decreased. And usually there's more options, and people end up with really more liberty. There's a freer environment. And I'll tell you, I read about a state, I can't remember which one it is, you guys may remember. They declared that all federal firearm laws were null and void. I think it was Virginia. And within their boundaries, for guns and ammo that were manufactured there. And there are at least a dozen more areas in which states now are they're nullifying federal laws right now. It's happening today. They had enough. And I'll tell you, in my opinion, I think as this precedent becomes more prevalent in the states and they know they can exercise states' rights, they have states' rights. If they do that, it's only going to make sense, moral sense, really, to extend that to the counties and the cities. Local control, that's what we're talking about. And I think this is going to grow and grow as we go forward here. It happened, not many people know, Dan. Remember, we were in Mecklenburg County in North Carolina opening a business, and Dan and I were there, and Marshall, you were there too.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, they were actually, they formally declared independence from Great Britain before the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. They basically said that the authority of the king or the parliament was annulled, vacated, null and void. They did it. And they set up an interim government all by their own. And then the rest of the colonies caught up, didn't they? But they were the first one, Mecklenburg County. Kind of interesting.
Order your copy of Monumental, In Search of America's National Treasure, by visiting us online at monumentalmovie.com. That's monumentalmovie.com.
The story of history is simply pretty clear. As government takes over the sovereignty of God, or claims it does, it never really does, but it tries to, it seems to draw in the most vulnerable people, and it gets them engaged or dependent on government to the point that when government finally turns on them, they are helpless. And they are usually the people that are left in the most desperate situation. As the Soviet Union collapsed in the 80s and late 70s and the early 80s and into the 90s, frankly, what you saw is the people that were most desperate were the ones left with nothing. And the people who had kind of garnered up the and pillaged over those years. They had everything. And that is, in fact, what happened. And that should be a lesson to people that are depending on government right now for their sustenance, that in the end, the government will take away from them and only give them what's available. And that's exactly what happened. Because the government is completely dependent on those people who work and pay taxes and put the money into the system. That is the only source of money to make the system work. And as that goes away, the government can only dole out what it has, and as it gets to be a smaller and smaller pie, the people that will suffer the most will be the people that are the most dependent. And that's kind of been the story all through history, if you want to look at it that way, that as government takes over the sovereignty of God, there is no mercy, there is no grace, there is no real care for anybody, because human beings don't really mean anything to government, because government isn't a real entity. Only God is.
Well, the truth of history, and this is why I love history, because it gives us so many answers. Even the Apostle Paul said that, why have these things been written down in Corinthians? It says, so that you may not stumble and fall as 20,000 of them did in one day. The reason why history tells us such a great story is it tells us that if you go one way towards state dependence and dependence upon the corporate man to feed you, clothe you, and take care of you, then you will end up in bondage. That's the story of history. It is proven. It's not a matter that God is judging. It is a matter of these are the principles of the universe and the way they work. When small groups of men take over, they always pollute and pervert the system for their dainties, just like King James did in the time of the Pilgrims, and he gave away the wealth of England within 1 year of becoming king to his beloved special man that he had in his court, and other people, his little dainty people around him, and the result is that the entire English empire was bankrupt within a year. Why? Because you can't trust one man or even a group of men in power, because they will become as gods, and that's what James said he was. He says, I am God on earth. Even God calls me God, James the First of England said at the time of the Pilgrims. He said, I am the bread of communion. I am the shepherd, and they are my sheep, speaking of the people of England. So with this crazy view of life, he went rampant over the liberties of the people of England. Well, that sounds really weird to us today, because you say we don't live in that system. But in reality, whether you live in Egypt or whether you live in England or whether you live in modern America, if the modern secular state, which is what it has become, gives you, feeds you, clothes you, cares for you, gives you your retirement, and educates you, that state has become your God. It now is your source of sustenance, and you look to the state. That's why so many millions of Americans are glued to the tube. That's why the markets are looking to what happens to the German chancellor, what happens to President Obama, how can he go on vacation, what's going on? Can't our government somehow solve this problem of our ailing economy? And our focus is a wrong focus, because there is only one sovereign. And if we'll go back and look to him, his gracious answers will provide more than we could ever ask for.